Breaking Up with Addiction is proudly sponsored by experts you can trust. Kind Bridge Behavioral Health, safe, non-judgmental counseling just a tap away. Welcome to Breaking Up with Addiction. I'm Corinne Wright, certified recovery and executive coach.
And I'm Gwendolyn Boyd McGee, licensed professional clinical counselor. So, Corinne, I'm super excited about today's episode, but before we start, I would like to do a homework recap.
Let's go.
Yeah, for our listeners that did catch our last podcast, we gave some homework to track your screen time. One of the motivations for us giving this homework is because a lot of the gambling that is being done, currently, it's usually being done on a screen.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Corinne?
I totally agree. Yes.
Yes. So what did you learn from the homework? And the big question is, what are you willing to do about it?
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah, last week, I know I was a little bit more thorough with the information, but I just would like to recap that it is important, Corinne, to track screen time because it can have a negative impact on physical and mental health. It can lead to problems like obesity. I mean, I guess if you're sitting around on a screen all day, not getting much exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Irregular sleep. I was told that the best thing to do for improved sleep is to disconnect from your screens at least an hour before you plan to go to sleep. So anyway, I'm hoping that our listeners are being more mindful about their screen time and that maybe they'll take some of the suggestions that we offered to be able to do better, really.
Yeah, because once you know your screen time, you can at least then that information you'll have to be able to use to determine if you need to decrease it.
That's right.
Well, are y'all ready for today's episode? Are you ready, Gwen?
I'm really ready.
Because, you and I talked about this before we put everything together. The co-occurring disorders was one of the things that Gwen and I, we talk about it in many other episodes and we touch on it lightly. But today we're going to go very deep into understanding co-occurring disorders. And defining it, I want you to imagine you're a gardener tending a beautiful but complicated garden. And in one corner, you have a rosebud that's struggling. Its leaves are turning brown. It's not blooming like it should. And you're just, at first glance, you're kind of thinking, is this thing dying? Or maybe it needs some sunlight. So you adjust the angle, give it more light so it can have that attention it needs. But the next day you notice that it looks like the soil is a bit off. Now you're wondering, is this plant going to thrive at all? And you're realizing that maybe the soil itself is a little too dry or perhaps something hidden beneath the surface is what's affecting its roots. And, gardeners have a big job because there's insects, there's pesticides, there's so many layers of different things that depending on how you want to tend that garden, that determines what methods you use and apply. And here, co-occurring disorders are just like this. On the surface, a person might appear to be doing just fine, or they might appear to be struggling in one area. But if they have a gambling addiction, when you look a little bit deeper, you're going to uncover things like the anxiety, depression, or past trauma that we talked about. And a lot of times with anxiety, depression, and past trauma, you have emotions tied to all of that. So that's kind of how it sandwiches itself together.
Right. And Corinne, that was a great analogy that
Thank you, Gwen.
used. Yeah, because it is important to, treat both things.
You have to. And that's the whole point here is that once you look at the combination of factors that are at play, then we have to look at the combination of factors that are required to take a holistic approach to healing. So when you have a co-occurring disorder, the wrong thing to do is to ignore one of those disorders while treating the other. The right thing to do is to treat both at the same time. So we're going to go a little bit into the prevalence and most common disorders that we talk about all the time, but we're going to unpack them now. And, the prevalence of co-occurring mental health disorders in individuals struggling with gambling addiction is high. Research shows that 50 to 75% of individuals with gambling addiction also experience one or more co-occurring mental health disorders. Mm-hmm. One or more. And that's to never to just assume anything about a gambler. That's the point we're trying to make, is no assumptions. So the most common, we're going to go through 4 of them today. There's depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, and personality disorder. So Gwen, in terms of the depression, we're going to just have some chats here really quick. Many individuals with gambling addiction experience depression as a result of the negative consequences of their gambling behavior. Now, here's where I want to talk to you, Gwen, because is it the chicken or the egg? Because on the reverse side, sometimes it's the depression that drives the person to the gambling behavior, and then one exacerbates the other. So is it the chicken or the egg, Gwen?
Well, see, it's both.
Yeah.
Really, because, Corinne, depression could be caused, from the gambling. Mm-hmm. From the gambling addiction, when they're used to that dopamine, maybe they're not getting it the way that they were before. And so they're starting to notice some depressive symptoms, some hypersomnia, sleeping way too much, fatigue, feeling like you're just carrying a weight, with every action that you do, also just feeling down and hopeless.
And again, that can be on either side. That can be as, I'm depressed, so let me go escape this depression, or I'm gambling and now I'm depressed because of the financial strain or the relationship strain.
Right.
And then that takes us to looking at anxiety and how gambling addiction also exacerbates that disorder due to stress and emotional toil that comes as a result of gambling. And so when you have people with anxiety definitely know how it feels to have anxiety. Mm-hmm. When you don't have anxiety, just imagine that your whole body is on this alert and you're unsettled. Your mind can't rest. You're just anxious.
Lots of rumination. Thinking of this, thinking of that. What about this? What about that? Yeah.
Unsettled, completely unsettled. And so now you have either or both can be accompanied with this gambling disorder, leading us into substance use disorder, which we all know is not a separation when people gamble in casinos, because they do what, Gwen?
They gamble and they drink.
Because the alcohol is free.
Right.
And it's going to keep coming as long as you're there. And so now, individuals with gambling addiction who do suffer with substance abuse disorder, research shows that 40 to 50% of those with gambling addiction may also have a substance abuse disorder. So if you think about co-occurring disorders in terms of building these layers, you have a gambling addiction that can be accompanied by depression and or anxiety and or substance use. And I'm saying and or because there are individuals who have all three. And then it takes us into touching on the personality disorders. And then let's talk about personality disorders. Many studies suggest that individuals with gambling addiction may also have personality disorders such as borderline personality disorders and antisocial personality disorder. So when it comes to the antisocial personality disorder, we have mentioned in the past how one of the symptoms of a problem gambler could be someone who is self-isolating. And looking at those two and how they're akin, this would be a sign to kind of keep an eye on, especially if it's someone that's close to you and you're recognizing a swift change in their behavior or personality. But when it comes to the anxiety, depression, and substance use, there's a published study in the Journal of Gambling Studies from 2022 and 2023 that found that 30 to 40% of individuals with gambling addiction also have depression. 30% have anxiety. And so these numbers are high. These are not low numbers. These are high numbers because you have a percentage of people struggling with gambling addiction. Then you have nearly 40, 50% of them who are struggling with these co-occurring disorders we're talking about.
Right. And Corinne, really, I would like for them to do some more, current studies, because when you think about it, most of the clients that we do get, most all of them have experienced anxiety in one form or another. Because when you lose money and you have bills to pay, you have a family, you have obligations, and you don't know how you're going to make it. Yeah. Can you imagine how much stress that could cause a person?
A lot. And especially on top of, see, when what Gwen just said, that's a powerful point, because when you think about all of how she just described this person's world, and you have a gambling addiction, it's not the word, it's the actions of the gambling addiction that you have to really think about. What does that mean is happening, right? That means money's being lost. That means haywire. That means a lot of things that are not funny, are not fun.
No, it starts out as fun, and then, it's downhill from there.
It's downhill from there. This dual diagnosis presents technique challenges in treatment, which requires comprehensive, integrated approaches that address both the addiction and the mental health disorder simultaneously.
Yes.
There is a symbiotic relationship between gambling addiction and mental health disorders. It is complex. It is not impossible to dig into, diagnose, and work a treatment plan for, unless the person refuses. That's the only thing that makes it impossible. So let's just remember that it could be either or, the chicken or the egg. It could be depression that drives you to gambling, or it could be, I'm gambling. Maybe I visited a casino or downloaded an app with friends, and all of a sudden this has changed my life, and now I'm dealing with depression, anxiety, or substance abuse. But regardless to what came first, we just want you to build your awareness so that you can address anything that may be holding you back from living a thriving life.
Absolutely.
Are you guys ready for some trivia?
I am.
I am too, Gwen.
So, Corinne, this week's trivia question is, and it's similar to one I asked before, what is the average age that men get a gambling disorder?
Okay, this is tricky. The last one was about women. This one is about men. I'm going to assume younger than 35.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw an arrow out there, and I'm going to say, maybe this is wrong, and I'm not going to guess this one, Gwen.
Okay, well, you don't have to guess, because I am going to be presenting the answer later.
Yay.
So, Corinne, one of the biggest barriers for people who want to get treatment for gambling addiction is stigma.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are a lot of studies that show that when you look at the percentage of people who actually may have a gambling addiction compared to the percentage of people that actually seek treatment, I mean, the percentages are just horrible. There are a lot of people who are suffering silently out in this world. And one of the main reasons why they won't seek treatment is because of stigma.
Yeah.
That's another reason why I believe a lot of the clients that we see, they end up being branded as liars, where you are not being honest. You're a liar. You lied about this. You lied about that. But this is the thing about it. A lot of people keep these things secret because of the stigma.
Exactly.
They don't want people to find out about it. So they do end up, in maybe a web of lies because they're trying to, conceal their gambling.
Gwen, hearing you say that, this is why you and I created this podcast. We were talking about how many people won't come to treatment because they may feel stigmatized. And we wanted to create an avenue where it doesn't matter where you are in your addiction, whether you've accepted that you have one or not, that you still have access to the type of content that we do share with the women and the men that we work with in treatment. And I'm just happy that you are touching on this point today about stigma, because this is a big deal.
It is. And a lot of times the stigma can manifest itself and show up as like shame, fear of judgment, internalized negative beliefs, about the condition. Maybe I'm just a horrible person, and it's just so disheartening that, people have to deal with this kind of a judgment. Many of the clients that have come through Kindbridge, that's a huge thing for them right in the beginning. It's like all of that shame and the fear of judgment, not wanting to let their their loved ones, their family know about it because of their fears of being judged, which, prevents them from having that kind of social support that is really necessary to recover, from this disorder. So let's get more into it. What about this internalized stigma, and the negative self-perception? So, what have clients told you, about this and about stigma and their feelings about it?
I'm glad you asked that, Gwen, because what's coming up for me are two things. One is it just reminds me of a type of client I've worked with, and that's the one that is struggling to accept that they have full-blown gambling addiction, right? And with that type of client, if they're in denial, if you're in denial about your addiction, but you are still trying to seek help, you are dealing with that stigma, because what tends to happen is if you admit to the people in your life that you do have a gambling addiction, that they are right, 9 times out of 10, they're going to expect a changed behavior. But because you haven't fully accepted that you're either ready for recovery or that you have an addiction, it's hard to admit that to them, because then you will be held accountable. And so, that's one thing that comes up for me. The other, when it comes to stigma, is it goes back to the judgment. It's how people will see me. It's the fear of, will anyone know that I have this problem? And, I just can't imagine the world of a person dealing with all this weight, right, and then having recovery be something that's in their sight, but there's this barrier.
Yeah,
between
the barrier.
Them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and stigma.
There's also really a difference when it comes to stigma on how it affects women as opposed to men. Most of the reasons that women, won't seek help is like their fears of losing social support or, financial difficulties or something like that. But the men really, they're more likely to deny they have a problem at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is according to information from the National Institutes of Health.
And I'm just speaking as a woman. Women hold a lot.
They do.
We hold a lot. And, running homes, running businesses, our lives, not to say that men don't, because men do a lot. But when you think about the difference in how a woman might be thinking about herself to come forward with something like this, when she's already, our minds are just wired to manage other people's kids. If you don't have kids, you're managing someone else or your own, or all the things and the to-dos and just keeping things rolling. And it's just two different types of minds. It takes nothing away from men. It's just, I understand, because I am a woman. I understand how women think. Not all women, but
right.
Yeah, it's
and another thing to think about too is that, with the stigma of a gambling disorder, it's a little bit different from mental health problems. Because, and I guess, for years and years, long time ago, lots of stigma for mental health treatment. And I think it was like way back in the day when they were doing all those experimental things on people with mental health disorders. Yeah. It was horrible. I've seen movies about it or whatever. I can barely even watch it. It's just, it's horrible. So people were seeing this, and then people were getting, even with people with like alcohol use disorder and other maybe drug addiction, they were just all being, locked up in facilities, and nobody wanted that. You think somebody wants to come forth and tell someone, that they have a problem so that they can go and lock them up and throw the key away? No, so I think that had a lot to do with it too. So people just got real secretive, about things like that, mental health, and any other kind of addictions. And families like to keep it secret, and they did not want to let other people know. It was that age, of like maybe the 50s, where it's like, everything's good back here in this house. Nothing going on back here. Everything's great. I mean, everybody wanted everybody to think that they had a perfect family. Everything was great when, everybody's got problems. But still, it kind of created like a culture of secrecy about things too, that I think exacerbated the whole, secrecy of people really not wanting to come forth to get treatment because they felt like they may get locked up or be experimented on. So then the whole secrecy thing was exacerbated, and it's just has not improved at the rate that it should have. The stigma around mental health has improved somewhat. Still some issues in the brown and Black communities. Still lots of lack of trust, for mental health professionals. And that is rooted in a lot of things that may have occurred in the history as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there is a parallel, Gwen, in the parallel of how you talk about secrecy. It's, if I do step forward regarding my mental health, I will be labeled, first off, because back then they would label people, oh, this person is crazy or something like that, instead of a true diagnosis for what's going on. Uh-huh. And then now fast forward to today, and you have things like gambling disorder. There's still a label of judgment. And there's still a level of accountability that they don't even know to expect. It's like, well, what happens if I reveal this problem that I've been, keeping a secret? So this is painting a really clearer picture of how although times are changing, times have not changed enough in the space of mental health and well-being.
It really hasn't. No. And one point that I think I missed that I wanted to make is that when it comes to, stigma compared to mental health issues and then, gambling, right? Mm-hmm. So actually, the public stigma of gambling disorder is even more prevalent, now than mental health, because they're like, oh, these are just greedy people. These are just irresponsible people, yeah. Right?
Which is not true.
It's not at all. These are people with a mental health disorder. Most people don't even know that, gambling addiction is a mental health disorder that is listed in the DSM-5. It is. So, it's hard to understand, what a disordered gambler may experience if you don't even know that it is a mental health disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here to educate y'all.
Yeah.
So let's talk about breaking the cycle, addressing both gambling addiction and mental health. It's very important to raise your self-awareness. Self-awareness is the opposite of autopilot. And we all have autopiloted behaviors. And we know that if you're gambling, some of those autopiloted behaviors are not working for you, but they're working against you.
Mm-hmm.
Raising your self-awareness is going to help you better understand whether or not you're dealing with a co-occurring disorder. Now that you have more information, the goal is not to self-diagnose. The goal is to document any behavior or symptoms you may notice and get with your healthcare provider to determine the root cause to figure out if you have a co-occurring disorder. Raising your awareness is also going to give you the ability to take the pause you need between the trigger and the action.
Mm-hmm.
The more awareness you can build on what's going on with yourself, the more you actually deepen the relationship with yourself. It's like getting to know a friend, knowing the habits that they have, the things that make them mad, the to-dos and don't-dos. You're kind of now rediscovering how to do that within your own inner self, between you and the triggers that cause you to gamble. Right. What triggers you? What triggers you? What triggers you? I want you to think about that. Gwen, you and I are not gamblers, but we get upset sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's something that triggers you?
Well, I try to, being that I am, a professional counselor, I try to always be mindful of, what's going on with me, mm-hmm. Kind of like what you do, Corinne, how do I feel? What do I need?
Yeah.
My thinking or my talking may be a little off. What's going on? But all in all, I think a thing that triggers me often is when someone assumes something that I maybe did something and it's incorrect, but I'm getting better. Because I'm just like, it triggers me to get in full mode. I'm like going through papers, doing this, doing that, kind of in a panic, making sure that maybe I did really do it right. But that's just, as a professional, that's a trigger professionally. Personally, I like to have a good balance. And when something that can trigger me is when I start maybe taking on too many things, not being willing to, say, no, I'm not able to do this thing for you. But I have improved on that quite a bit.
And I just want to push that further, not to assume this about you, but I want for the listeners, if that could be in some people's lives, people pleasing. And people please, because I used to be a big time people pleaser that I wouldn't say.
That's why I said I got better.
Yeah, it's like you won't say no. You'll take on all the stuff that people need from you at your own behest. And it's like, man, and then that triggers something in you to go and do something else to let that steam off. What is the something else, right? And that's what we want to get to the point of with you all. What triggers you and what are alternative coping mechanisms that give you a similar escape to that feeling you get from gambling? The more control you can gain over your addiction, the more control you can gain over your addiction. And we're trying to get that control and building our awareness. Yeah.
Yes.
What about some treatment strategies for co-occurring disorders?
Earlier, Corinne, you hit it right on the head of the nail when you talked about integrated treatment, because that is, according to research studies and the professionals that do this stuff, that is the most effective way to treat co-occurring disorders, at the same time. And it makes sense. Okay, for instance, let's see, we have this guy, Joe. Joe has an alcohol use disorder. Joe has depression, and Joe has a gambling disorder. Poor Joe. He's got a lot of challenges, Corinne.
Joe has a lot on his shoulders.
Yeah, Joe needs some help. We need to help him. Okay, so he has all these things going on. He comes and he's seeking treatment. And maybe he comes in and he's just seeking the treatment for the depression. He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm about to lose my job. I just can't. I've been missing too much work. I'm tired all the time, which is, probably hypersomnia. People with hypersomnia, they be sleeping like 12, 14 hours and then get up and they're still tired. So, depression can be very debilitating. So he's having issues. So he goes in for depression and he goes to a place that is pretty thorough. They give him a PHQ-9. They give him a GAD-7. And then they also administer alcohol use disorder assessment, and they find out, okay, not only does Joe does, his PHQ-9 score was high. So Joe does have depression. Okay. But then the clinician identified that Joe does have alcohol use disorder as well. Okay. So there's co-occurring. But I want to stop you right here because I want to make a point. Normally, in most community mental health facilities in this country, that would be it. They wouldn't even probably ask anything about the gambling, Okay, but this facility, just by chance, they have a clinician who used to specialize in gambling. So she's like, hey, y'all, we need to start putting in the, gambling assessment. So they do that and they identify it. Well, he is going to need to treat these things all together in an integrative approach. So he would have something like, of course, he'd see a doctor to get medication. He would get a medication for depression, but also there's something called naltrexone that is available to help people, with cravings and urges. It's really, really good for alcohol. And I think that's how many of the doctors were prescribing it that way. But I've read studies recently that it's also being prescribed for gambling disorder. It also helps with those urges and the triggers for that. So he would get that probably. He would have a treatment plan. And he would have individual sessions and probably be going to substance abuse treatment, like outpatient. So he would be getting work there. And he would also be going to Gamblers Anonymous.
Yes, Joe.
He would be going to Gamblers Anonymous, and his therapist would be working with him, for depression, but she would find a professional coach to help him with the gambling. So Joe was getting all this treatment, but this is what integrative treatment looks like, correct?
Yes.
Treating all those things at the same time. That is the best way and will yield the best results when you're treating co-occurring disorders.
Absolutely. You know why it's the best? Because it doesn't allow room for you to lean heavy into one thing while the other thing is still being, is still thriving. It pulls you away from those things. If
one thing is happening, it's going to be affecting the recovery of the other things. I mean, okay, so let's look at that. Let's say that Joe does have these three things: the alcohol use disorder, the gambling disorder, and depression. Okay, but when he goes to this place, then they only identify the depression. They do the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, but the mental health professional doesn't do the alcohol use disorder or the substance, assessments. So what happens is he's going to have some medication for depression, right? Mm-hmm. What about the alcohol use disorder?
What about the alcohol? Listen to me. Keep going. Gwen, my excitement around this particular topic right here is because if you don't address all of these things, are you really addressing anything?
No, because I was going to get to that. Okay. He goes home with some depression medication. Mm-hmm. Well, he's going to be drinking. And it is not, his medication is not going to have the kind of efficacy that it needs to, because alcohol affects the way that medication works, especially with mental health meds. So already there's an issue. Okay. So when he starts drinking, he's really going to probably be discombobulated or whatever, because the medication's not going to be working for him. And then he's going to get on there and do some gambling because he hasn't been treated for it. And he may lose more and more money, drink more, mix that medication, and then that could be dangerous.
And an entirely other issue now.
Yeah. So, I mean, did anything really get better?
On paper, Joe can say he sought treatment. But you're right. Did anything really get better? And this is why we're sharing these kinds of content with you, so you can understand, especially for family members and loved ones of gamblers, so you can understand what's really going on. And for the gamblers, this is why some of those assessments you take are lengthy. When you're, why is this assessment 20 minutes long? Because it has, 30, 40, 50 questions. And those questions can help us determine if there are co-occurring disorders when you're coming in the door.
Right. And I would like to at least point out a few types of therapy that I think are very effective, for co-occurring disorders. Of course, I'm going to start off with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, because it just is. It helps people to identify and change their negative thought patterns. So you change the way you're thinking, then your behavior is going to be different, right? Mm-hmm. Dialectical behavior therapy. Now, I don't do that myself, but I have heard that, and research studies have shown that one works too. And it's dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. Motivational interviewing, something that I use a lot with gamblers, because it helps with those people who just maybe have some resistance to change. They're just not ready to change their gambling behaviors. A lot of times with motivational interviewing, you can help them to see that, the benefits of change. And if you keep working with them, hopefully, there'll come a time where they will be willing, to engage in treatment. But that doesn't mean that the motivational interviewing stops. It may be necessary, different phases throughout the recovery process. But those are the three therapies I wanted to point out.
Great shares, by the way, too. Phenomenal information. So looking at the power of the mindset. Mindset shifts are required for sustainable change, especially if you are pursuing recovery. A growth mindset can support long-term recovery from gambling addiction. I want you to truly understand that recovery does not happen overnight. Don't come into recovery with the idea that I had a gambling problem. I need to fix it and move on with my life, because that's not the relationship with recovery that's going to move you forward.
That's not going to work.
It's not going to work. There's no such thing as you just coming to a few sessions or meetings and then this was my problem, I'm done with it and it's over. Because we've talked about the reasons that people end up in that addiction. So there is no quick fix. We want you to accept that true recovery for you is going to be a lifestyle, a journey, a lifestyle ahead. And with that in mind, accepting that your pursuit to maintain recovery requires structure. Just like, you know how some people can work from in the office and they feel like they need to have that in the office experience where they know what they need to do, where they need to be, when they need to be there. But if they work from home, they feel like they have no structure. Some people are like that. And, the same thing for a problem gambler and someone with gambling addiction. If you have no plan, no structure, no treatment, what is recovery?
Well, it's going to be real hard to achieve without those things.
It will. Gwen, where would they even start without those things?
I really don't know. And
I don't know.
And I know that, Corinne, there are people out there, who may be listening to this podcast and they just feel like they're lost, and they're alone, in the struggle, and they don't know where to turn. And I hope that they can find us. I hope that they can listen to the information that we provide. Yes. Get that hope, know that there are people out there who are willing to help you, who want to help you.
With zero judgment.
That's right.
Zero bias.
So that
nothing but love.
You can start going and achieving that kind of healthy lifestyle that you so much want.
Absolutely, because not sticking with recovery is a playground for relapse. Now, if you can manage your mental health, you can indeed manage your addiction. And we've learned here that the state of your mental health plays an impactful role and contributing factor to your addiction. So reframing your negative or non-supportive thoughts and rewriting the rules is going to be imperative. This is a conversation I've had several times with clients, Gwen, and this goes into that, those ads that come up in the commercials, and there's one that offers a $50 credit for you to play. And I've had gamblers to tell me, but what about the free money? And I said, the money's not free. It's not, because this is not money you can go and spend. You can't do anything with that money but gamble.
That's
and
right.
Once you gamble and lose the 50 or win on it and lose that back, because those are the things that happen, where does that leave you? And most gamblers will say, well, I only lost the 50 they gave me, so it was a wash. And then I'll say, well, what did you do next? And what did they do, Gwen?
They kept going.
They kept going. And so reframing your negative or non-supportive thoughts in this case can look like that $50 is a trap.
It is.
Because it is.
It's a carrot, come on, they're reeling you in. Come in. And, Corinne, I do want to make the point, some people may benefit from that $50, that whatever, and they may, win on it, take it out and never go back in there. But people who have problems, with gambling addiction won't be able to
able to do that.
Yeah. And then so that's just them going in there, and then starting to chasing the losses. And it's just downhill from there.
Absolutely downhill from there. And this is why we keep harping on things like identifying and recognizing your triggers, reflecting on the moments that you have the urge. When is that urge to gamble the strongest? What's happening? Are you lonely? Are you bored? Are you stressed? Are there specific things happening? Is there an argument? Is it payday? Keep a trigger journal. Write those things down and identify the patterns, because this is going to give you the information that is undeniable.
Right.
And last but not least, this is one of the most important things when it comes to mindset shifts. You have to be intentional about making space for your emotions. Make space to express. Let it out. Express those emotions. We've talked about things like art, music, whatever ways whatever positive coping mechanisms you need to do it. And if you're struggling with the phrase positive coping mechanisms, because sometimes when we're, teaching different people, the phrase positive coping mechanisms sounds just like that. The phrase, it's like, well, what is that? What are those? Can you name some? What I want you to think about is not necessarily the phrase as much as we're looking for what are the things you enjoy doing that are positive and add value to your life.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that can be positive coping mechanisms, experiences, learning, creating, giving back, and so on. And with these positive coping mechanisms, it's important to avoid high-risk environments while pursuing them.
Yes, and in order to be successful in recovery, Corinne, it is essential to have healthy habits for a balanced life. This includes prioritizing physical and mental health well-being, physical exercise. Maybe you're doing some yoga, mindfulness practices, guided meditation, eating right. You are what you eat. You really are. Are you drinking enough water, or do you just drink sodas? What about your sleep patterns? Getting enough sleep? I think somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. That's pretty good. But if you're getting anything less than that, then you may want to take a look at changing some of your routines and some of your habits before you go to bed. What are you doing to manage your stress? Are you eating and overeating? Are you drinking alcohol? Are you exercising and talking to people that you trust and you value, going out, being with friends and getting support? Looking at all of these things, Corinne, is so important.
Yeah.
Because, if you put this much work into recovering from disordered gambling, you want to try to set your lifestyle up to be healthy and to look like something that's going to be conducive for your goals in order for you to be happy. Corinne, focusing on good, healthy habits can significantly improve overall health and contribute to really a more fulfilling and happy life.
I believe that. Because when you look good, Gwen, you feel good. And when you feel good, you want to look good.
That's right. And you have enough energy to, do the work to do so.
Yes.
So now it's time for the trivia answer.
Give it. I want to know. Listen, I have my number in my head. I'm not going to exaggerate if I'm close, but I'll be honest if I'm off.
I'm sure you're going to be right on it. So the answer is 27.7.
You know what? I was a little bit off. I was going a little bit younger, but yeah.
Well, the median age is 23, if that helps.
That was closer to where I was.
Yeah.
Okay.
But notice the contrast with, we're doing this trivia, with the men's answer. And then we did it a few episodes ago for women. And it's like, it's a decade difference.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I think that, a lot of times women end up spending more time with the children when they're younger in their 20s.
It goes back to what I was saying too, with the things we're holding. We're holding things that keep us busy, right? And then that unbusy unravels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then boom.
Yeah. Be watchful for the unbusy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are we ready for homework?
Yes.
Are we ready? All right. For homework today, the homework assignment you can actually do now if you'd like, or you can save it and come back and listen to this episode again and do it then. But what I would like you to do is a self-assessment of your mental health. We take mental health seriously here, and we want you to take a moment to just answer these questions. And again, this is not for you to self-diagnose. This is meant for you to check in with yourself, and based on your answers, determine if you need to speak with a healthcare professional to assess whether or not you have co-occurring disorder. Are you experiencing the following: anxiety or excessive worry, persistent sadness or depression, feelings of shame or guilt related to gambling, emotional numbness or detachment? Write down your thoughts and be honest with yourself, recognizing the connection between these feelings and your gambling habits is a crucial step in your recovery. And now maybe you've answered these questions, but you're on the fence about talking to someone. Here's what you can do for yourself. If you're someone that's like, I'm going to start at step 0 by myself, I don't want anyone involved. Okay. Based on what you've reflected on, create a short action plan to address both your mental health and your gambling addiction. And this would be you starting your recovery journey. So if you're stressed, if you're triggered by stress, what's a healthy coping mechanism you can implement when you get stressed? And the more, the merrier. For this, you can go back to listen to our episode on coping mechanisms. If you're dealing with depression or anxiety, the steps you can take here: seek therapy, group support, or speaking to a trusted friend. These are things that you can do without going out to see a mental health professional if you feel stigmatized. Set small, achievable goals for yourself each week and focus on addressing a mental health and a gambling trigger. So you're just focusing on yourself and doing the work. And if you find that you've identified any significant mental health challenges, please consider reaching out to a mental health professional, or at the very least, getting in a support group. And stay tuned for our next episode, where we're going to be diving deep into the cognitive side of gambling addiction and understanding the mind behind the bets.
Addiction doesn't define you, and breaking up with it doesn't have to be a solo mission. Kindbridge Behavioral Health offers safe, non-judgmental support anytime, from anywhere. Visit kindbridge.com/appointments and start getting the help you deserve today.